With the arrival of the Beatles Get Back on home video, have we finally reached the bottom of the Let It Be well? Maybe, or maybe not. What's next from the Fab Four? Let's discuss right now on Track by Track. Hey everybody, my name's Kyle, and this is Track by Track, music reviews, news, and commentary. Thanks for tuning in today, and if this is your first time here, please take a second to click subscribe so that you won't miss future reviews and more. So as I hold this Blu-ray edition of the Beatles Get Back in my hand, I have to wonder, have we finally reached the end of a long and winding road? This is a project that was first announced 3.5 years ago. Since that time, we saw it evolve from a theatrical film into a 3-part documentary TV series on Disney+. The pandemic was obviously a huge factor in that, just as it was with the 1-year delay in the release of the Let It Be album Super Deluxe Edition. The home video release of Get Back was originally planned for February of this year, but then that got postponed to July due to a glitch discovered in the discs at the last minute. But finally, here it is, ready to fill a space in your Beatles collection that you've been reserving longer than you likely thought necessary. So, that's it, right? Well, I'm not so sure about that. I have a strong feeling the Beatles are not quite done mining this particular era for new products. But the question is, will they end up giving fans what they really want? Let's take a look at the possibilities and the probabilities, starting with the film itself. Director Peter Jackson is famous for releasing lengthy extended editions of his films, so it was certainly expected that the Beatles Get Back would receive the same treatment on home video. Yet the DVD release that just came out is a strictly bare-bones affair. It's exactly what you can see on Disney+, with no additional scenes or bonus features at all. A lot of fans are disappointed by this, but let's take a moment to put what we have into the appropriate context. Jackson's Get Back project started as a traditional film. He was tasked with editing an enormous amount of film footage into a reasonable cinematic experience. Realistically speaking, if he'd stayed on that path, Get Back would have been a single long movie, perhaps with a runtime of around 3 hours, maybe a little longer. What we ended up with was nearly twice as long. That's the luxury moving to streaming TV afforded Jackson. He was able to skip past the theatrical edition and move right to the extended version. In fact, Jackson himself confirmed this was the case. Appearing on the Something About the Beatles podcast, Jackson explained that when Disney told him they had no plan to release an extended version on home video, he decided to make the Disney Plus version essentially the equivalent of that. He took what was at that time a 6-hour version of his Get Back film and extended it to the nearly 8-hour version that premiered on Thanksgiving 2021. So for all the fans asking where the extended edition of Get Back is, I think the answer is you've already got it. Speaking of directors, keep in mind Peter Jackson was not the original director of this film. All of the footage was shot by director Michael Lindsay Hogg back in 1969. For perspective, Peter Jackson was 8 years old at the time. Ultimately, he's done a marvelous job restoring all of the footage and reassembling it into an effective time capsule. But one has to wonder, is there a limit to how much more effort Jackson wants to put into a project that's essentially recycling the work of others? It seems likely Peter Jackson has other projects he must be anxious to pursue. After all, he hasn't directed a fictional film since the last Hobbit movie came out almost 10 years ago. How much longer could he possibly want to linger in the land of the Fab Four, re-editing another filmmaker's footage? I could be wrong, but I suspect that between Disney's disinterest and Jackson perhaps being ready to move on, a so-called director's cut of Get Back is simply not going to happen at this point. That's not to say that we won't see some additional product come out that further leverages the material from Get Back. I think the most obvious choice would be a video and album release of the Rooftop Concert. After all, they've already dipped their toes in that water. Back in January, we saw the Rooftop Concert released as a limited-time theatrical experience in IMAX and movie theaters. Granted, it was exactly the same edit as what we saw in Get Back, meaning it included all the cross-cutting between the rooftop and the street scenes and the police. It would be nice to see just the concert in its entirety uninterrupted. Well, until it ultimately does get interrupted, but you know what I mean. In fact, that's exactly what we did get later in January when the Beatles surprise released a digital-only live album of the entire Rooftop Concert. So far, there's been no physical release for that on either vinyl or CD, although the super deluxe editions of Let It Be do include most of the performances, just not sequenced together in order. Now, let's be honest with ourselves here. As legendary and historic as that Rooftop Concert may have been, there were really only 5 songs performed, with multiple takes of 3 of them. Hardcore fans will want every second of it, but I'm not so sure the mass public would be all that interested. Consequently, if this does get released on video, vinyl, or CD, I don't expect they will make much of an event out of it. And you know, that's okay. If they get the material out there for the fans that do want it, that's all that matters. To that end, I wonder if we might see this show up as a Record Store Day Black Friday release, since that's probably the audience most interested in buying this. But what about the original version of the Let It Be movie? Rewinding back to January 2019, when the then untitled Get Back project was first announced, it was actually stated that in addition to Peter Jackson's film, a fully restored edition of the 1971 Let It Be film would also be released. There's never been any specific details announced about that, so it was never clear if it would be a theatrical release, a streaming exclusive, or a physical release on DVD and Blu-ray. In fact, once the pandemic threw all the plans into limbo, there was never any further mention of the original Let It Be. Has it been canceled? Who knows? There hasn't been a peep about it in a long time at this point. Now, I think it is reasonable to assume that all of the footage has been restored as part of the Get Back project. Peter Jackson pretty much confirmed that. So at this point, it may just be a matter of editing it all together using the 1971 film as a blueprint. For that, Jackson's involvement would likely be little more than executive producer. But is there a market for it? Would it sell enough copies to make it worth it for the studio? And now that Get Back is out there, do Paul, Ringo, and the estates of Lennon and Harrison even want the 1971 version of that story to be resurrected? I think the answer to all of those questions is probably not. I think the powers that be likely now consider Get Back to be the definitive document of that era, and that the Let It Be film will never be released again in its original format. It should go without saying, of course, that this is all just my opinion. This is me theorizing about what I think will or won't happen based on how I interpret a variety of factors. And the truth is, if you've made it this far into the video, you're likely to be exactly the kind of hardcore Beatles fan that would buy everything they could put out, be it a restored Let It Be movie, a complete Rooftop Concert album and video combo pack, or an uber extended edition of the Get Back documentary featuring hours and hours of additional footage. Guess what? I'd buy all that too. But the reality of the situation is there's not enough people like us to make all of that a sufficiently profitable endeavor. On top of all that, I think it is highly likely the Beatles are ready to move on and focus their marketing efforts on other archival releases. Until Let It Be was delayed by a year due to the pandemic, it was looking like super deluxe editions of their albums was going to be an annual event. I suspect they plan to get back to that this year, and since Let It Be was kind of the end of the line, working backwards now from Sgt. Pepper's seems like an obvious choice. A lot of people, me included, would love to see a super deluxe edition of Revolver. In fact, I'm predicting we will see that happen later this year. But I think it's best that we don't set our expectations too high for that. Keep in mind, the band was still working with limited studio resources at that time, so the master tapes aren't as easily manipulated as they were on the later albums. Giles Martin has already commented that technology may not yet be advanced enough to be able to break down those 4-track masters to the degree necessary to build the kind of surround sound mixes that have been done on the later albums. It may well be that there's only enough material in the archive to create a 2, maybe 3-disc package at most. But let's not forget about solo Beatles material. In fact, if there's anything I think is a sure thing in this video, it's a super deluxe edition of John Lennon's Sometime in New York City. That album celebrates its 50th anniversary this year, making it an obvious choice for expansion. Following on the heels of the excellent box sets for both Imagine and Plastic Ono Band, this could easily be another must-have for any Beatles fan. Then there's the wild card of Paul McCartney's ongoing, or at least we hope ongoing, archive collection. The last entry in that series, Flaming Pie, arrived 2 years ago in July of 2020. Could we see Macca expand one of his still untouched 70s albums like London Town or Back to the Egg? I think that's what fans are hoping for. There's still a few albums from the 80s and 90s he has yet to revisit as well, so who knows? Paul currently seems to be milking his McCartney 1, 2, and 3 trilogy, perhaps one last time with a somewhat superfluous box set. Once that well is exhausted, will he get back to the archive collection? Don't count out the possibility of a live album and video from his current tour, though. I can easily see that happening for Christmas, which would likely extend the archive collection dry spell into 2023. Finally, I think it is worth mentioning the possibility of other solo Beatles archive releases happening from either Ringo Starr or George Harrison. Truth be told, Ringo has never had as much of an impact as a solo act as his bandmates, and I don't anticipate we'll ever see a super deluxe edition of any of his 20 albums. At best, we might see something next year for the 50th anniversary of his self-titled third album, which was also his best-selling release as a solo artist. Meanwhile, this year marks the 40th anniversary of Harrison's Gone Tropo and the 20th anniversary of his final album, Brainwashed. We might see some kind of deluxe editions for those, but definitely nothing of the scope of his 50th anniversary sets for All Things Must Pass. And after all, that album was easily the crown jewel in the Harrison discography. The next best bet could be a 35th anniversary edition of Cloud 9 from 1987. Believe it or not, that was Harrison's only other album to go platinum. So there you go. Those are my thoughts and predictions for what I think we can expect next from the Beatles. Almost definitely a new super deluxe set from John Lennon, probably a deluxe release for Revolver, maybe a Rooftop Concert album and video release, and who knows, on a new McCartney archive collection entry. As for an extended edition of Get Back or a restored version of the Let It Be movie, don't hold your breath. But what say you? What do you think we're realistically likely to see from the Beatles camp in 2022 and beyond? And then, setting realistic expectations aside, what other wild Beatles-related material would you love to see emerge from the archives? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. Once again, my name's Kyle, and this has been Track by Track. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, plus check out some of these other videos below that I think you might also enjoy. And of course, be sure to subscribe, because true music fans always want new releases the day they come out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.